Welcome to another webinar of Product Community Greece. For those of you who it's your first webinar joining, we're just gonna say a few things about the community and what we do and where you can find us. So of course, you can find us at our LinkedIn group and LinkedIn page, as well as at our meetup group. So make sure you follow both those spaces so you don't miss out on any kind of activities that we do. A few words on what the community's purpose is. Of course, we want to bring product people together, share knowledge and best practices so we can learn from each other and connect. And our aim, of course, is to build this kind of networking platform. And, you know, like being online has hindered that a bit, but still we've tried to keep everything up, doing online webinars as well as networking events. So we hope you've had the chance to take value from that as well. And in regards of what we do in regards of activities, as you guys know, we do webinars like the one we are doing today. We also have networking events. We have hosted a few networking events online as well, having group discussions around topics, giving us a chance to connect with each other and exchange knowledge around specific topics. And of course, the ultimate purpose is to interact. Hopefully we can do that in person as well, starting the new season after summer. Thank you again to our sponsor Orpheum, who is making our webinars happen. And this is who we are. Ioannis Papikas, he's doing product at Orpheum, Kalia Kyriotaki at LearnWorlds, and myself. So feel free to reach out to us over LinkedIn, connect with us. We'd love to hear from you, what you do and any ideas you have about the community. For today's webinar, if you have joined before, you know we have an extensive space for questions for our speaker. So you can submit your questions here at Slido. We're also going to show you where you can find this afterwards, but make sure to open this right now so you can type in your questions. We're gonna go through all of them after our speaker's presentation. So for today's speaker, actually, we have a very exciting topic. I don't think we have talked about this in any of our earlier webinars or meetups. We have Thanos Bismpigiannis, and today's topic is about product management versus product leadership and how to make that kind of transition. And I think Thanos is truly one of the best people to talk about it. He's had the pure product manager career path, transitioning from product manager to senior product manager, product director, and now head of product at Plum. So very exciting to hear his perspective and experience on how we can also transition towards that path. So I'd like to welcome Thanos to the stage, and Thana, you can also start sharing your screen and open your camera, etc.
Thanks, Olga. Thank you very much. Let me share my screen quickly. Hopefully you can all see my screen now.
Yes, and if you could also open your camera so we can also see you.
Cool. I think there I am. Great.
Yes.
Thanks again. Thanks for having me here today. It's great to be part of this community and offering to that as much as we can. I think your initiatives are great, making product a bit stronger in Greece and beyond. So, and as Olga mentioned, one of the things that I like to discuss today essentially is something that I feel it's on pretty much every PM's mind, essentially, especially for people that are early in their careers, on what's coming up next, and also how do you move from like an individual contributor into like a people manager, essentially. It's a process I've been through the last 3-4 years of my career, and personally myself, I found a few challenges which I would like to share, as well as the learnings that I found out through these challenges, but also by discussing with people that did like a similar transition like me, essentially, on what they learned through the process and what were the different things that they faced, right? So hopefully you'll find this helpful in your own like career development moving forward. Let's start first of all with what I define as a product manager versus a product leader, right? Just set a bit of context so that we all understand what we're talking about in the next few minutes, right, of the presentation. And my definition of like product manager is like the product individual that works in a and an empowered and an autonomous team, right? Unfortunately, this is not always the case in every setup and every company, but that's where I believe like product managers can have like the full potential of delivering, of developing themselves, but also delivering value to the users, right? And as part of squads or teams or groups, depending on how its company calls it, they work very closely with developers, designers, QAs. Like this composition may change a bit from company to company or from setup to setup. But the idea is like there is a team that has the full capacity and capability to start like by defining a solution for a problem all the way to delivering the solution and seeing like the adoption of the solution by the user themselves. Now on the product leader side, we're talking about people who go beyond like working with an individual squad, and they work very closely with other product managers who themselves work with like product squads to deliver, discover and deliver product for the users, right? So their scope is generally broader. We may be talking about like an industry or a customer segment or like the full product proposition of the company overall, right? So now that we define pretty much how this looks like from a role perspective, I would like to talk a bit about like the different transitions, right? And different companies have different organizational structures, different titles, different definitions of the role. Generally, like the product space is very creative in at the definition of the role level as well, right? But I will use like the career development process that you see on the current screen. Now, in some companies, some of the levels may be missing. There may be additional levels as well, different definition, but I'm working here with the assumption that on a setup like this, you have somebody that comes in as an associate PM. And at that level, they work very closely with other like more experienced product managers. They probably get like a few features to work with and focus specifically on delivery. And then as they move on into the PM role, they start developing more like their problem solving capacity and skills. And ultimately getting in the senior PM level where they have a broader spectrum of ownership. But at the same time, they're much better on identifying or like discovering like the user problem, defining the solution and delivering that all the way. Now, in theory, you would expect that, you know, as soon as you get to this level, then it's an easy step up. You go and you become a product lead, you get a few product managers reporting to you. Now you have a broader, you know, spectrum of responsibility. You can oversee larger chunks of the product, even like the whole product offering in smaller startups. And then you keep going, right? The way you reach like this part of your career already. Unfortunately, this is not true, right? And going back to the beginning, again, you see people joining as associates. They work very closely with other PMs. They grow their like product definition and like product discovery skills. They become product managers. They have full ownership of the products that they're working end to end. They're very successful on delivery, and then they grow up to become like senior PMs, where they get, you know, broader ownership, like larger chunks of the product, like bigger parts of the product proposition. And then suddenly there is the moment where this person feels they have done enough, and they now want to transition to a level where they have PMs reporting to them, and they can broaden in this way their remit even further, right? Owning like a bigger part of the product, having more impact to the customers. And that's where things become a bit strange, because a lot of people really get stuck there, and it's a very confusing place to be in, right? Because a lot of people that are especially very good as senior PMs, they keep doing a very good job. They keep delivering. They get acknowledged about the delivery of work that they do, but they still struggle to do this transition over to becoming like a product leader, either like a product lead or a product director, like further up, like the career ladder. And it seems that the gap between the senior PM role and the next, like the product role, which is assuming it's like the first role when you get to have like people management responsibility with other PMs, it's very different to the stages that the individual went through in the first like 3 stages in this case here, right? You're like your first stages of their career. And then you get confused because you're still doing better. You're still trying to deliver value, but then you cannot really make this leap forward, essentially. So what's happening, right? What's the problem in this case, right? Why is this so difficult, right? It's like, it should be the same as I was a PM, now I'm a senior PM, right? I'm doing things better. I have a better, like a broader like remit of things to do. Why is this so difficult, right? And for this, I would go back to like the really basics, right? Where we need to understand like what's like the definition of the role, what's in the scope of its role, right? And what makes somebody successful within the specific role, right? And if we focus, let's say, first on like the individual contributor spectrum of the career path that we saw on my previous screen, essentially, it's all about getting a problem and potentially, like in the very beginning, even the solution, right? And executing, right? It's all about delivering something to the user. And then as you develop further, like your execution skills, then you go into like a problem solving setup, right? Where you get assigned a problem and you try to figure out what's the best solution for the customer, what's the solution that the customer will use or they will pay for, essentially. And then as you mature further and you develop further your skills, now you can discover yourself, like what are the customer problems? What's the meaningful problems you need to focus on for the customers? Then you can move on with the solution and also the execution of the solution at the end, right? So if we look at that spectrum of responsibilities, right? From the associate PM all the way to the senior PM, or like the last stage before you get to have like people management responsibility, it's all about becoming like more sophisticated on, you know, how you work on a specific type of product problem, right? How do you improve your like discovery, your delivery skills, your, you know, your product proposition skills overall, right? And also, how do you expand your individual personal goal, right? You had a feature, now you expand the specific product. Probably you can expand on offering like a broader solution to like other relevant types of users. But then it's all about like these three main things, right? It's all about the discovery, the delivery, and like the driving of the adoption of the product itself. Now, moving into like the product leadership side of the spectrum, like the product lead and above in the career path that I showed previously. Now you're moving away from like having an individual squad, being very close to a very specific set of problems, right? And now you're looking into a variable set of problems that are owned by different teams. That the problems may be totally different, right? You may have like growth problems, you may have scalability problems, you may have like product market fit problems to work with, right? And also you don't work directly with the development teams, right? You have like a broader view, but a higher level view. And like this remit of yours will keep growing from probably like a specific industry that you focus on as part of like the product offering to a customer segment, or even like the whole product offering of the company, potentially as a VP of product or a CPO. And if we look into what could make like a product leader successful and what is included into like the role, we're talking literally about like owning like the product direction, right? You're not delivering things. You help people find out what's the direction of the company and the product so that they deliver the right things, right? You're building the teams by hiring, but also by coaching people that you hire, right? You're also defining the topology of the team, right? You have a company, you have resources. How do you structure these resources in the most efficient way so that you deliver like the most value fastest to the user, right? And finally, along all these lines, you have to essentially put together like what's the product development process, right? How will the product team work together with engineering and the rest of the stakeholders to make sure that the product is successfully discovered, developed, and delivered to the user? So in this case, and in these types of roles, we're really talking about like a breadth of understanding of the different kinds of problems, right? It's not about you getting better on like delivery or discovery, it's about coaching others getting better, right? And it's not about you handling your own squad, it's about you handling the different resources you have in a way that will make the product organization more successful. And finally, it's about you on expanding further on the direction where the product goes, right? So if we sum all these things up on a single slide, it's very easy to understand that we're really talking about like two different roles here, right? And this means that going from the one role to the other, just developing your existing skills is not enough, right? Don't take me wrong here, right? Being a very good individual contributor PM will be of great help, right? Because then you get to coach and train people that do what you used to do before, right? So being somebody who has done the work right will obviously help training people the right way later on, right? However, it's not enough. And I think that's the point that a lot of people are missing, including myself, right? In the very beginning, when I tried like this transition over like to a more product leadership role, you struggle because you keep doing things better and better. But as you can see, like in these two sets of lists here, right? You keep improving skills that are not very relevant to what you want to achieve, right? So whatever really got you all the way to the level of a senior PM will not help you get further, right? So you need to go back and revisit a few things. So the question is like, how do you really do that, right? I mean, it really depends if you think about it, right? And I have like a specific like career progress so far myself, and I moved from like bigger organization into smaller startups. There are others who started on the startup world and move into like a more corporate setup. There are others that have like a pure corporate career development, or others that have always been like on the startup world all the way, right? So there are like different approaches depending on the environment where you are, like the size of the company, the culture of the company as well, the opportunities that may arise while you try to develop your career as well, right? At a high level, just putting like a distinction between like the corporate and the startups, and that's purely based on what I've seen in my personal experience. And this totally depends on your own personal style, right? What kind of person you are and what are the ways you prefer working in, essentially. Corporate structures generally offer like very well-defined career development paths. They can help you a lot on what to develop, how to develop. There is a lot of hand-holding on going through this process, which makes it a lot of time much more less painful in some sense. Now, the problem there is sometimes these processes are extremely structured. And even if somebody is like extremely talented, you really have to go through the process. And sometimes it's like, it takes a lot of time. There is a lot of bureaucracy. There are a lot of like processes in place to facilitate this that may make you feel like that you're kind of slowing down. But also within like a corporate environment, like there is always like a risk of having like less impact than being in a smaller organization, right? You own like a product of a bigger organization. So your work can be sometimes like less visible depending on which team you're working on. Now, on the startup world, there is a lot of ownership and autonomy, and your impact can be like directly visible to the customers and the company as well. And obviously, as the company grows, there are always like new opportunities to keep growing, right? There are always new stuff to work on, and there are opportunities for you to grow yourself being part of these new things. However, in the majority of cases, especially in earlier stage startups, there is a lack of established processes, right? There is no process that says, you're like a senior PM now, these are the things you need to get better off, get evaluated so that you jump into like a product leader's level, and then you get some people reporting to you, and then you grow your organization from there. Also, sometimes you may get limited by the size of the organization, right? A lot of times in smaller startups, you may be like the first PM joining, right? I mean, obviously you will not have any PMs reporting to you. And in this case, you have to really stick with the organization till the organization grows enough. And as you grow the organization, then start hiring PMs within your organization, right? And this makes it a natural transition over. Again, the challenge there is you really depend on the growth of the company itself, right? And another obstacle that I've heard a lot of times comes up, right? Because of the lack of resources or trying to be as efficient as possible, like on a startup setup, a lot of times you get to do two roles, right? You get to have your own squad where you wear like your PM hat and you're focusing a lot on like delivery and discovery. But then you also have a couple of PMs reporting to you where you have to wear your like product leader hat and make sure that these guys get the support, the coaching that they need to do their best, essentially, right? For their own squads and the company as well. The challenge there is like each one of these roles by themselves, it's a full-time role, right? So trying to do this together at once, it's always a huge challenge, right? That can make the whole environment pretty hectic, right? Ultimately, if all goes well, you transition gradually into like a pure product leader role. But again, depending on how quickly the company grows, this may take different timeframes every time. Another point around making the transition, right? There are a couple of mistakes or approaches that people take that lead you to a dead end, essentially, like make you struggle on making this transition overall. And it's things that I have seen myself, but also hear from other people that made the same transition. And it's funny, and sometimes it's interesting that these couple of things may look like very obvious. A lot of people fall into this trap, right? And they spend like years trying to go around them. And sometimes it's very difficult, right? You fight against yourself and to change how you behave, how you work, how you prioritize. The first thing is you need to delegate effectively, right? I think that the interesting and the contradicting part of this kind of blocker is a lot of times this is the trouble that really good individual contributor PMs face, right? Being very confident about your work and like being good at your work may really be like an obstacle in these cases, right? Because if something comes up that is difficult and complex, you may feel that you really need to take full ownership of that to make sure that you deliver that. And based on your past experience, you may have done like equally complex projects, right? The problem there is twofold, right? On the one hand side, by doing that, you don't give the opportunity to your team to get involved in a hands-on way and get full ownership of that complex or difficult problem, right? So essentially, you are becoming an obstacle of your team's personal development, right? On the other hand side, now you're spending more time on being hands-on on a very specific problem, and you're missing out on spending your time on doing like really valuable, like strategic work, hiring people, coaching others, essentially to grow the organization more efficiently. The second part that I've seen a lot of times is people don't adjust the way that they communicate and the way that they influence. Like, again, going back to what we defined in the very beginning as like the PM role, you work very closely with a squad, like sometimes smaller, sometimes larger, but generally there are people that you work with them like on a daily basis, right? So they have the full knowledge and the full context of what's being built, why it's being built, and when it's being built, right? So they get to know a lot of these things, which you don't have to communicate. Moreover, when you work within like a squad setup, in most of the cases at least, the squad goals and the PM goals are always aligned, right? It may be KPIs, it may be OKRs, whatever like the framework the company uses. The team is always fairly aligned, right? When you define what you're doing next. So again, there is very good alignment. So you don't really have to negotiate or try to influence a lot of things, right? Now, moving into the product leader, you're getting into a position where you're not working only within the squad or within the product organization, but you go up and across teams, right? You get to work with sales, marketing, finance, operations, or other different teams internally, or even externally, right? You may have to influence like external stakeholders, like partners. And these stakeholders or these teams do not have the same context as your squad or yourself, right? A lot of times you have to educate them, right? You really have to explain what's the product proposition, what's the value, what's the benefit, but also what's going to be the cost of getting something delivered, right? What's going to be the thing that needs to be deprioritized so that you deliver the value that you just explained to them. And also, in a lot of cases, the product goals or KPIs may not always be fully aligned with a different team's KPIs, right? I mean, it happens a lot in bigger organizations and less in like smaller organizations, but it still happens where the KPIs or the KRs are not fully aligned. It's becoming even more difficult when we're talking about like external stakeholders, partners, governmental organizations, or like other interactions that you may have beyond like the boundaries of the company itself. So you really need to think very seriously when you transition from like an individual contributor into a product leader. How do you communicate and how do you influence? And it's a major part of your role to make sure that you do these two things really efficiently, right? To help, first of all, yourself, but then also the team and the company overall. And some final thoughts, right? A couple of learning points, which I found like out the tough way essentially, but I feel that some of you may relate to or may find useful as well, right? Smaller things, but still important, I feel, if you want to make this transition a bit less painful. One is start preparing early, right? If you think that you really want to be like a product leader, right? Because something that we didn't mention along all these calls, right? There is definitely a great career to build as an individual product manager, right? As like an individual contributor level. You can be like an industry expert, right? You may spend times either in the same company or different companies working on very specific like products. I don't know, like credit offerings, like fintech products, or mobility products, right? That will make you like the expert PM on anything that has to do with like mobility in my example, right? Or you may want to spend time on a specific technology, right? You may want to really be like the best like technical PM on anything that has to do with AI or machine learning, essentially. There are definitely like some really interesting careers to build at the individual contributor role level, right? And also there are companies, bigger ones, who can support like this career path, like in like big tech, like Facebook or Google. there are like specific career paths that you can take on the individual contributor route or to a people manager route, right? And there is a point where you decide which route you take and you spend your time accordingly, right? To becoming like the expert on the specific like product or technology or industry, or you move like to a broader, like more people manager related role, right? However, if you really think that you want to go like down the mainstream, which I believe like most of the people will go into like a product leadership role ultimately, you really have to start preparing yourself early, right? I feel that the skills that we discussed previously are things that you can read about a lot, but applying them takes effort and takes a lot of learnings essentially, right? So try to get as many opportunities as you have, right? Try to coach friends or other colleagues that want to become PMs, right? On how to do the transition from marketing into product or from technology into product. Get these kind of opportunities to help them like do the transition that you did when you first like got into like the product management career. Or if there are like any strategic initiatives on your company, right? Try to be part of them, right? See how like product leaders talk about things, how they communicate things, how they go about approaching problems overall, right? Also, always have in mind that most of the times you'll get to prove that you do the role correctly before you get the role, right? It's very rare that I have heard people getting a role without having proven themselves on the specific role skills. Now, the second thing that I found extremely useful in my case was having a mentor, right? Having somebody who has done a similar transition to the one that you're trying to do in the past at some point, and you can trust them to use them as a sounding board, essentially, right? Talk to them about your approach, talk to them about the actions that you're taking and the results of these actions. Now, ideally, the best case there is, if you're lucky enough, this person is your direct line manager, right? However, experience says that this is a very rare case. And a lot of times you either have to look for somebody else within the company that could potentially help you, or even go beyond the company, right? A friend or somebody you go to meet like in forums like this one, right? Which are like extremely important on or building like a network that can help you like progress your career. And, you know, like meet with them like once a month, like play back what you've been doing, share your confusion with them, right? And hear what they have to say, right? I mean, as PMs, we all know that we have to iterate things, right? The best product is not launched day one, right? You have to iterate like 1,000 times to get it there. We just need to apply a very similar set of principles, you know, for our own development, essentially, right? And keep this going till we make the transition, and then keep growing within like the product leadership role. So that's what I wanted to present and talk about. I hope that most of you found it useful, and hopefully you will get to apply these things. And I'm open to get any questions you may have.
Great, thank you so much, Thano. Amazingly useful presentation with so much practical advice. So I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen with the questions. So guys, before we start going for the questions, there's a lot of interest around, there's a lot of questions, so I think we can get right into it. But before we start, reminder, you can go to slido.com and enter this code so you can submit and upvote more questions. So Thano, first question here is, we just had the vote and switched the order. So what kind of skills and achievements and abilities are you looking for into the people you manage as PMs in order to set them to a promotion path, let's say, for a product leadership role?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I think, and it aligns a lot with what I already discussed, right? I'm following what I'm pitching pretty much, right? I mean, the signs that you really need to see, right, is especially like on the communication beyond like the squad. That's a very important part, right, of your role, like moving forward, right? Communication, especially when you go to grow like your own team, you know, you have to let off like the hands-on control you have, and you rely a lot on your communication with people, right? Either as a broadcasting setup where you have to inform people within the product or beyond, you know, what's happening, what's going on, essentially. But also like, how do you communicate with individuals? How do you deliver news, good or bad? How do you present things, right? I think it's something that a lot of PMs get the chance to do in smaller organizations. In bigger organizations, unfortunately, because of like the more structured setup, you don't get the communication opportunities that much, right? So I would definitely look into this, but also I would look into people who are a lot of like self-starters, right? I mean, as I mentioned before, a lot of times a PM or a senior PM may have a very specific set of problems they're looking after. Like looking at somebody who can kind of once in a while kind of step back, look at the bigger picture and understand, what's beyond like the spectrum of products that they're focusing on. Having like this realization that, you're part of like a bigger set of features or products, you're part of like a bigger offering to the user. I think this gives like some good hints of people that are interested, but also may have like the capability to kind of focus a lot on a specific problem, but then also kind of take like a 30,000 feet height view of things, right? That we give them like a more strategic and more like overall view of the current proposition. These are like the main aspects that I will look into.
Great. So we have a clear, we know how to get promoted now. Great. So let's go to the next one. How do you work towards the transition if there's nobody to manage in your small product team? I think more or less you already answered this one. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add here in the scope of working in a small team.
I mean, I think it's an interesting question, right? Which we covered partly. One thing is, as a product, till the point where you become like a product leader, you keep influencing people, right? And after you become a product leader, essentially, you don't have too much management responsibility beyond like your direct reports, but you have a lot of influencing responsibility, right? So making sure that you take advantage of, how you communicate with other teams, like with different priorities across different like verticals, right? How do you communicate beyond like the company as well, right? If you're the first PM and there is no other PM in the company, it's like your responsibility to be like the PM and the product lead on the same time, right? A lot of times the CEO may have like part of the responsibility, but it's a good opportunity for you to kind of step up, right? Go and look in more like strategic parts of your work, like work very much more closer with like partners, be involved with like the bigger decisions rather than just like the delivery aspect of things.
I'm also making notes, by the way. Great. How do you go about mentorship, which you also mentioned in your presentation? Do you believe it can help a PM lead here his way towards this transition? At which steps could the mentor help the most?
I mean, that's an amazing question. To be frank, I think I mentioned that as the last thing on my slides because I feel it's the most important thing, right? Now, fortunately or unfortunately, we are on a career that evolves a lot, right? I was lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it, to start like product management in 2008. There was no cloud. You were product managing on cycles of like 8 to 12 months. You were delivering a product on CD-ROMs. Something was breaking, you had no clue what's going on. And then along with the technologies, and the different infrastructure capabilities, not only the technologies evolved, but how we are building things and how we're doing things evolved as well, right? So my take is there are a lot of like books around how to do the transition. There is obviously good to read all these books and try to associate yourself with them and how much they align with what you do, your circumstances, and what's the next step in your career overall, right? But getting somebody who has really done it and who has done it in a similar setup like you, I think that can bring like the most value, essentially, right? Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, my belief is like people see themselves as like individual like people managers, where they kind of instruct or order things to be done. I'm a big fan of like the mentorship or like the coaching approach, right? I definitely believe of the manager being like a coach to the individual, identifying what they do well and what they do well and what they don't do well, and help them to kind of fix like essentially the drawbacks that they have and further like push on like the strong points that they can offer to do like whatever transition, right? Not only from like a senior PM into like a leader, but also in the previous steps of their career, like from an associate PM to like a more like a senior PM role, or further up, like from like a product director to VP of product, right? So I think that it's always helpful to have somebody who has done what you did before, because it will help you kind of discuss your issues, get a different view, go back and pretty much like question your approach a lot of times, which is tough and difficult, right? But I think that's, at least in my mind, the most effective way to do things.
Great. Maybe we should start a PM mentorship program within the community. I think that's actually a great idea. So what do you think is cooler? Managing a team, working on an established product, or being an individual contributor launcher, meaning like only working on new products, exciting stuff? So what do you think is cooler?
Okay, that's a difficult one. I think it really depends on your circumstances, right? I really feel that if you have done like the latter in your career, like and you've been like the individual who have done something with either like big impact from a client perspective or a big business success, or like some new breakthrough, right? Because you got like a new technology and you applied it on a specific problem and you were the first one to do that. That's definitely cool, right? And this can establish you as kind of a person that can be like one of the top candidates of getting like in a product leadership role as well, right? However, again, as I mentioned previously, you know, I know that there are people who enjoy like the people management, like the coaching, like growing people role much more than others. So I cannot really advise on the two, right? I want to transition more and more into like doing the first thing versus like the latter, which I've been doing for many years. But again, as I said, like previously, there are like some really cool career paths to take as an individual contributor, right? And there are like some star PMs like in Greece and outside of Greece that they do like a brilliant job. And, you know, they feel happy with what they do. Also, the other point to mention there, right, is being an individual contributor PM doesn't mean that you're getting underpaid, right? There are career routes and like opportunities where individual contributors may be paid higher than like a people manager role, right? Again, you need to find the right company, the right culture, the right setup there, but it's not something that is not possible.
Okay, so there's an alternative. Not everyone needs to be a people manager, right? Okay, so this should have quite high books you would recommend, if there are any on top of your mind.
I'm a big fan of like broader, like older books overall, right? I feel that, you know, if people are reading a book 20 years later, it's definitely a good book, right? So it has essentially survived like the test of time there. So it's definitely like worth reading. Like my favorite ones, I have like 3 favorite ones, like 2 from a product perspective, and one which is like a broader, like people manager, like business view. Like Inspired is one that I read like on the first version back in like 2008 when I did my transition into product management myself. And there is a second version from Marty Kagan, who's like the founder of the Silicon Valley Product Group. Like great blog to follow, great articles. The book is highly recommended for somebody who transition into like an individual contributor role, or they want to develop themselves within this role. And then they very recently launched like a second book called Empowered, which talks about like the leadership role, right? Which is, I think it's part of the fact that, you know, the product role only came up in like technology the last 10 years, right? So all these people that got into becoming like product managers all these years back, now they're looking to growing themselves further. And there is more and more demand into how you become like an effective product leader. The reason why I like these books is because they have like really short articles and they are really pointy on like what they are addressing, right? You really read like 3 pages, it summarizes like exactly the problem that you want to approach and how to approach it. So it's a very good reference book to go back to like several times while you work on your career, right? Now, the third book that I was talking about is like The Principles by Ray Dalio, who's like, it's a bit like him. He's the owner of Bridgewater Capital, like the biggest hedge fund of the world. And he has spent time working on, you know, managing people and growing organization, which goes back to like some very basic principles on, you know, working with people, being efficient, kind of reviewing your performance or your career or your essentially partner's performance essentially. And how do you make sure that all this works at the individual level, but also like at the organization level, which I found like really useful to go through. So these are like the 3 books that I would recommend.
Great. I think everyone's placing book orders as we speak. Okay. Can someone go directly from working in a startup without a team, as you as well described, to a product leadership role in a large organization? So to make that kind of leap. So how should they pitch themselves? I think here is the question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that everything can happen. I've seen really weird transitions of people, right? From product to different roles, from outside of product, like weird roles. I've seen journalists becoming PMs. Like it's a very, I think the opportunity is out there. Now, doing this kind of transition, I would always push into the strengths, right? Or whatever you did at the startup level, which may be more ownership, right? Better end-to-end understanding of like the product, or like better understanding of the customer, right? Things that will potentially bring value into like the larger organization that you try to join, right? And in fact, a lot of big companies, especially like on the big tech space, they really value startup experience, right? Because they rely on people being autonomous self-starters, and they know that from a smaller company, you've already gone through that, right? You've built some things without the relevant support, the platform team or the infrastructure team, or like the huge IT support desk that can help you on anything, essentially moving forward. And you had to do a lot of things yourself. So I would play a lot into this part of your role. Versus, I understand that probably where the question comes from is, you're not used into working like in a bigger environment, like probably a bit more complex to communicate things through or navigate any bureaucratic like processes that may be in place, right?
And probably directly managing people, which is also the differentiation that you made, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, right there, I would play more on the influence side of things, right? In smaller companies, you have to do a lot of things yourself, right? So you get to learn a lot of things by doing that, which obviously help you like develop your career much faster, right? I can go back to my own experience, right? And I mean, so far, I've pretty much spent like 60% of my career so far in like smaller organizations, let's say companies less than 60, 70 people. And then the rest in like bigger organizations of like up to 120,000 people, essentially. And the pace in which you develop yourself, you learn new things, you apply new things, is probably like 10x faster in smaller organizations versus bigger ones, right? So I would try to pick all these things that you learn, all the things that you do, which most of the times are not part of your like role specs in some sense, right? As a PM, I would put them together and kind of show how this can deliver value in a bigger organization, both at the product level, but also, on coaching people and getting people essentially to develop themselves, right?
So we have a pitch ready, everyone. Great topic and cool presentation, Thanos, here from Manolis. A quick question. Is it possible to upgrade to a product leader without being SME? I'm missing this abbreviation here. Sorry, guys. I don't know, Thanos, if you're familiar.
I suspect that's like subject matter expert, right?
Subject matter expert, you're right. Because it says to one or multiple products earlier. That makes sense, yeah.
So in my mind, there is no limitation there, right? As I said, like on the presentation, being a good PM doesn't really mean like having like the full knowledge of the industry you're working on, right? Definitely is an asset that is useful, especially when you get into a new industry or you get to a new company or a team. And obviously, it's kind of a requirement to have a good understanding of how things work because you're building products, right, for the specific industry. Now, the thing, as I mentioned, is you get evaluated on your people management, coaching, strategy skills more than your expertise in a specific company. I mean, I've worked previously with product leaders that they just got into the industry, right? Brand new industries. Like I've met people going from industries like, insurance into payments that are not very closely related, right? And they got into like leadership role and they were really good at that, right? I've seen people moving from, mobility into like AI infrastructure, right? It's a different set of principles or skills that you're getting evaluated on, right? So if you can make the case that you have like all the skills that can make you like an efficient leader on whatever is the industry you're entering into, it makes like your industry expertise a bit more irrelevant, essentially.
And what about strategic direction? Because if you're not familiar, with the industry and, the ins and outs, let's say, so like, is there a way to kind of compensate on that? What do you think?
I mean, I think as you're a PM, right, whenever you enter a new industry or a new company, it's part of your obligation essentially to get to understand the industry as much as possible, right? This doesn't really mean you have to go and understand like every little detail, right? Let's say you may really understand how, I don't know, like the FX industry works, right? You don't really, this doesn't really mean that you know how to run like an FX trading desk, right? But you really need to have a good understanding so that you know what are the problems that customers are facing, what are the potential possible solutions, and how you can work with your team on delivering these things, right? Your PMs should potentially be like experts on the area of product that they're working on, right? I don't see yourself having like the requirement to do that, right? It's a big benefit if you are, but it's not like I think it's not like a breaking point for you transitioning into a role like this.
Makes sense. Let's move to the next one. What's the best PM attribute if you had to choose one and only one? Okay.
Okay, that's an interesting
Not
one.
even three, just one.
I think yeah, that would be like, I think it's like, in my mind, it's like it's the driving force that people have essentially, right? It's the attitude of people that, you know, they will not take no for an answer, and they will try to find their way around things to deliver what they feel will deliver like the relevant value. I think this personal drive of people, I think it's the perfect indication for a good PM essentially.
Great answer. I you know, it's actually, I think it's a very original answer. Usually, you know, people say communication, stuff like that, and I think it's actually very accurate. To MBA or not to MBA? Here goes another one.
Okay, that's an interesting one, because I moved into product management before I do my MBA, and then I turned back to product manager after I did my MBA. I know a lot of people that did the transition during the MBA, going from an engineer into like product management, and it seems that it becomes more and more of like a stream route, like a career development path. It seems like business schools the last probably 10 years are more like transitioning people into product management versus going into banking or consulting that used to be the case in the past, which have created a lot of hype around the role for good or bad, right? It gives you like an extra step to transition in, right? It may not be like the cheapest or the most efficient way to do that. And I would look into an MBA from a totally different perspective, right? I would look at MBA like from a broader view of why you're doing that, at what stage of your career you're doing it, and what do you expect after that, rather than like a pure transition into product management. My feeling is, if you really know that you want to go into product management, you don't really need it. There are ways to go into product management without an MBA.
Okay, we have, I think we still have time for a few more. Do you think that the PM's background should be related to the nature of the product? I think you also kind of answered that in the previous question, but is there anything else on your mind that you'd like to add?
No, again, I will reiterate, it obviously helps to have some background. Let's say, I mean, myself, I come from a computer engineering background, right? So working in technology gives me a lot of benefits, right? I can talk like easier with developers. I know what they're talking about. It gives me like a better perspective of communicating with them. Now, at the product leader level, I think a lot of these things become slightly irrelevant, right? I think it's part of your role, and like, I think it's a characteristic of PMs to be fairly adaptable and get to learn things quick and fast. And I think one thing that changes a lot, right, in product management is what you're working on, like new products, new technologies. So I don't see that like as a blocker. It's a benefit, but I wouldn't like constrain myself, you know, let's say if you have never worked on like a specific type of technology, or if you're not an engineer, not to look into, you know, getting yourself into product management.
Oh, okay. There we go. Do you have open PM positions at Plum?
I mean, we are always looking for good talent overall, right? I mean, we're a company that's growing very successfully so far, and we have like some really aggressive targets as a company. So we're definitely obviously looking for new people all the time.
Great. So I guess people can connect with you on LinkedIn and possibly reach out if they're interested.
Of course. I mean, obviously, I'm open to follow up with people if they find like my my thoughts interesting, and as I said, right, I'm happy to help people develop their careers further.
Great. Okay, a couple more. The normal path is senior PM to product leader, but what about following the other way around, from a small startup to a large corporate environment, and I guess going to a senior PM role, so more into an individual contributor scope?
Yeah, I mean, again, right, I've seen people doing that as well. Most of the times I've seen it as, somebody from a product leader perspective will go into a smaller organization, and, part of being a smaller organization, they get to do things that go within more like the product management spectrum versus the product leader spectrum of things. But then, gradually this goes back into like a more like distinct set of roles as the company grows. I've also seen people that they want to work on very specific technologies or very specific industries, and they want to take like this inverse, essentially, transition, going back to like the individual contributor role, which will also give them like the opportunity to get to know like the industry or like the sector better, right? I think it's probably like the easier way to go, right? If you want to go from like a product leader, go back to like individual contributor. But again, it depends on like your personal objectives there.
Great presentation. Would you recommend to find a mentor that is compatible with your personality, or someone that will get you outside of your comfort zone?
Okay, that's a good one. It's a bit, I don't know, it's counterintuitive, but I would go for the latter. I think making the transition in general means taking you away from your comfort zone, right? As we said, right, you probably, in order to make it all the way to the senior PM, you've been doing some good work, right? So you've been doing some things really, really well, right? And probably you've built like some good self-esteem, you have built confidence of how you work. Now going back and challenging these things and trying to improve other things that so far you haven't been working on, by definition, this is pretty much going against yourself, right? So having somebody who can push you on this, it may sound tough, right? But I think at the end, it will be at your own benefit.
Okay, having working experience from big corporations to startups, if you were 10 years younger, would you follow the same career path? If not, what would you change? Okay,
I think if I would go back, I would start with startups. I wouldn't start like with big organizations. And that's like a personality thing as well, right? I mean, the reason why I left bigger corporations was because I felt that I was getting trapped. I wanted to do more, but there were like very specific kind of things that you can do within like the scope of your role. Also, one thing I like, and again, like this is very personal, is I think I overestimated the potential risk of a startup when I was younger, right? Thinking back now, the worst that can happen on getting like on an early stage startup is, the startup doesn't work out, right? And like a year, 2 years later, you're looking for another job. I mean, a lot of times, even at a corporate, like a few years later, you may be looking for a different job either way, right? But the learnings that you have gotten like through the process are like, as I said before, like 10x more than what you would get like in the same time frame in a bigger company. Again, this is very personal, right? And I would really urge people to think of themselves, how they like to work, because other people want like things more structured, right? And they prefer these things. And they don't like the stressful environment of a startup. Well, you're thrown into the deep, right? And you try to figure out things yourself. Yeah. So you really need to think of yourself how to approach these things.
And let's go to our last question. Can a deeply technical person who's very focused on his or her craft be a good PM?
Yes. I mean, yes. I don't see why not, right? Obviously, the one thing always like with a product, right? You always need to have like visibility of the bigger picture, right? It's not about the technology, it's about the user, right? As soon as you tie them together, being very good at the specific technology or application shouldn't really like make you blind from like the customer problem, right? As soon as you combine that, sometimes it can even be like a big benefit, right? If you understand like the product, the technology, the industry extremely well, you will understand the problems better, right? And you will probably be in a better place to find solutions for these problems. So I don't see these two things as conflicting, to be frank.
Great. Thanos, thank you so much for both the presentation and answering all our questions. I think the tips and the insights you gave were very meaningful, and we can see that from the questions as well. And there's a lot of interest also from the audience. So I think maybe we should revisit in the coming season again, maybe do it in a different format. I think it's going to be, there's a lot of hunger and thirst, I feel, around this topic. So thank you so much again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Olga. Thanks for inviting me, and I hope it was a useful hour for everybody on the call.
Super. So guys, before we say goodnight, just a couple of things from us. It's time for our summer break, so we won't be having any events in the coming months. We hope you enjoyed this online season in the last 6-7 months where we transitioned to online. So we are very excited to see you again coming September. Hopefully we can start also doing some things in person, either presentations or networking things. We'll see how things will go. Nevertheless, we'll definitely be back in September with more things. So make sure to join our groups on LinkedIn Meetup, and you can also subscribe to our mailing list just to make sure you're into the loop when we start having events again. And of course, if there's any ideas or thoughts, or if you'd like to actually present, also be a speaker, just contact us directly in our email address. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your summer. It's been great having this community over the last months. We'll see you in September. Thank you, Thana, again. I think we closed really high on a high note before summer. So thank you so much again. Thank you, everyone, and see you in September.